Afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to what is now episode 5 of our LinkedIn live series. And before we get into this session with Carly, who I'll introduce shortly, I just wanted to say a massive thanks to Luke for joining us on our previous session, but also the fabulous feedback and comments that we've had. It feels like we really did hit a number of interesting points for many people actually who tuned in, both live during the session, but also watched us back. And I really appreciate the ongoing feedback and support. We will be doing something a little bit different today, which is we won't be announcing episode 6 at the end of today, but that will be coming very soon. So do stay tuned for our next LinkedIn Live when we announce that in the very near future. But let's get back to today. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Carly today. Afternoon, Carly.
Afternoon, Paul. Thanks for having me.
No, my absolute pleasure. And I especially enjoyed you were so keen to volunteer to come and join us on this session today.
Absolutely. For anyone that works within the Agena Group, they'll know exactly what that looks like. For anybody external to the Agena Group, Paul has a very clever way of having us volunteer for these types of things. But we do have a bit of a motto. You have to do something that scares you often. And so I've said to Paul already, here we go. Here's my thing for the month.
Well, there we go. There we go. Well, hopefully it won't be too scary, Carly, and hopefully you won't ask me too many difficult questions like Luke did in the last one.
I'm going to try.
Okay. Well, fair enough. Carly, just for those people who don't know you, do you want to give a brief introduction, talk about your role in Agena?
Sure, absolutely. So my name's Carly Miller. I'm the People Services Director here within the Agena Group. And I often find it very difficult to talk to people about actually, what do we do in people services? Some of you will know that's people teams. Some of you will know that as HR teams. And we have such a variety about what we do. So much we can talk about. Some we can't talk about so often internally. But essentially what we do is look after the employee throughout the whole of their employee life cycle, but also partnering with the business to ensure that through our people, we are getting the most out of our people. We're creating the best place for them to work, the best environment, for them to really have the best version of themselves and to do their best work.
That's great, Carly. So today we're talking about our insights-powered people plan. And I guess for me, it's fair to say, and I'm really proud of the progress we've made recently, but also fair to say that we've got some work left to do. Would that be a fair summary for you?
Absolutely, Paul. Yeah. So we are just starting the second year of our 3-year people plan. And whilst we feel we've made some really good progress in year 1, and certainly with regards to insights and really helping us have the foundations so we can have those insights, there's still a long way to go, as myself and my team will tell you. I'll be honest, I think in most organisations that I've worked in, I'm not sure that I could ever say we've ever truly finished, because as is a matter of people and business, these things just never seem to end. We're constantly evolving and being so agile, but equally that's what's so important as well to our strategy and to my department is, working with the business, being as agile as we possibly can. So yeah, that's definitely a fair thing to say, Paul.
Yeah, and if we think, I mean, it's interesting actually. Last week was National Apprenticeship Week, and what was great was reflecting on the people that we have in the apprenticeship roles and some of the progress that they've been making. And I guess for me, that's probably one of our big highlights of the difference and the progress we've made so far through our people plan. And maybe I don't know whether your highlight would be the same or something different.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we first launched Agena Ascend, which is our apprenticeship programme, we were really keen to overcome some of the stigma that can be attached to apprenticeships, that they're not for those who have perhaps just left school or college, that actually it doesn't matter where you are in your career, that you might have been in a career for 10, 20, 30 years. But with the average of us having 7 different careers in our lifetimes, for us all to just do the same thing throughout our careers feels a little bit unachievable in this day and age. We always have so many options. So with that, we wanted to ensure that throughout the Agena Group, that didn't just mean that once you've had a good experience for a certain amount of years in a particular role, that was kind of the end, that you have that mobility. And one of the things that we're very proud of is just last year alone, 10% of our organisation were in a new development position within the Agena Group. And that echoes our previous 3 years as well. we have a real feeling, as I mentioned at the beginning, of doing something that scares us, of lifelong learning. And that's partly what Agena Ascend offers us. So we have a few different people in women in leadership apprenticeships. We have some who have started off as being patrol operatives, now as part of our project delivery team. The opportunities are really quite endless. And that's why it's so important for our people, but also our people managers, to know their teams well enough and to really help them, guide them through the Agena group.
That's a really interesting first insight, Carly, I guess, in this conversation. 10% of the workforce in a different role at the end of the year from the start of the year. I guess for me that feels really healthy in terms of supporting people's progression inside the organisation and preventing the need for them to maybe think development only comes external or changing employer. We ran a poll last week, which was all about whether people are using stay interviews or not. And it was fascinating, actually, that 65% of the people who responded didn't know what a stay interview is. I am hoping every one of those people who voted in that 65% category with us today will certainly watching back. And 10% of people responded who did know what they were not actively using them. So it'd be great for us to return to that a little bit later in the conversation, because I think that for me is such an important part of how we've changed the way that we look at retention and attrition within the organisation. But I'm thinking, why don't we start right at the beginning of the employee life cycle and talk a little bit about how we're onboarding people. And I know recently you've introduced some onboarding surveys, and it would be great to maybe just explore that topic a little bit further.
Sure, absolutely. So for us, we're really fortunate in the People Services Department that we do have insights throughout the employee life cycle. And so with that onboarding, that's so important. You've gone through all of the effort on both sides of that recruitment piece. You've chosen who you feel like is the right candidate for the role. And now it's all about ensuring that they have the best experience, and hopefully that works out for both parties. But to help us ensure that that's the case, we do have our onboarding surveys. So if you like, it's a bit of a pulse survey in between the employees' first few months. So we have that at month 1, month 3 and month 6. So they have the opportunity anonymously, if they wish, doesn't have to be, to tell us about their experience, what we could do better, but also what they're enjoying. I think that's one of the things in terms of insights that we can forget to do that, what's actually going well, because you need to know that as much as you need to know what can be better as well. So we take those insights, we feed those back internally as much as possible, and the most important thing, we learn from them. So we make changes, whether that's in that onboarding experience, training, part of the job description for the role that we've advertised and they've been successful in. In all of those points, we just try to make sure that we get that feedback so we know what we can do differently. What we have been really happy to see is actually how positive our employees have found the onboarding experience. But we can never take that for granted. It can always change. And actually, I mentioned at the beginning, so the infrastructure that we've put in place to help us with insights as part of our people strategy. With our new HR information system, we have put in a new onboarding portal, and that's really helped us streamline the process. We've thought that through right from the beginning, and just recently even our CTO said, gosh, there's lots of steps. And absolutely, yeah, there is. And that's so that we can just ensure that we're thinking about all of these things, because I know what it's like when you have a new starter and you're also keeping the business going. There's so much to think about, and we really want to make that employee experience a good one, because let's face it, employees that have a good onboarding experience are much more likely to stay with you. And that's what our onboarding surveys give us the insights to know whether that's likely to happen or not. And if it's not the case, it gives us the opportunity to make those changes before that isn't perhaps the role that this individual wants to stay in. And look, that can happen sometimes too. What I'd say is that also provides us the insight to know that that's more likely to not be the case, and to deal with that too.
Yeah. And Carly, what sort of questions are we asking through that onboarding survey of those new starters?
Yeah, so we're asking them for an evaluation on the recruitment experience. So right from the job posting through to screening, through to interview, meeting the team, those kinds of steps. We're also asking them for the first 2 weeks, which is often where they have the most amount of training, to evaluate some of those training programs, those training points that they'll have. And that some of that is e-learning, some of that's face-to-face, some of it's on Teams, some of it could be real life. It really depends on the role, but also how they find the team that they're working in, and also the wider team as well. How accurately the job description actually reflects the true role, because that's really important for us too. Whenever we are advertising a new role, we'll also go back to the design of that role. It's important that we're creating meaningful work for employees, and that can look different for all different types of people. So trying to really create that it's no easy role, but it is something that I think, as long as our people managers have that in the back of their minds, we're certainly on the right track to hopefully achieving that. We'll ask them how that whole onboarding experience has been from a cultural perspective, from a psychological safety perspective. We'll ask them even from the physical facilities that they have, the equipment that they have, what works well and what could be better. So we're constantly learning, constantly getting this information through. How often that they're having check-ins with their line manager. Do they need more? Do they need less? Because it's a learning for that line manager as well as it is for the individual one, this settling in period that we like to call it. And so it provides such valuable information for both parties. And it's really a two-way process in that. We want our new employees to feel that they're accountable for shaping the role to how it can be the best for them, in the same way that it would be that expectation for the line manager. There's also a bit of an evaluation on their line manager, or that might look different for some people, but on how they're finding that experience with them. Have they got the amount of training that they might need? But what is it that they would kind of mark out in terms of how happy they are between sort of a 1 to 4, so we can really get that on a bit of a sliding scale. And that can change between month 1, 3 and 6 too, because like anything, it can be quite overwhelming when you start a new role versus kind of month 6 when you feel a lot more established. We'll find at that month 6 point that they'll have had their objectives set as well, which is in line with our business outcomes each year. So they can start to evaluate themselves too based on their objectives for the year ahead. And some of them can find that really helpful. I think that clarity on kind of the mission and where it is that we're trying to go is something that we hear in terms of feedback is really positive. People want to understand that, the meaning behind what they're doing. So yeah, we find all of those kind of points really helpful.
Yeah, no, and that's really great, Carly. And I was reading someone's survey output the other day, actually, who had just said it was such a fantastic process to have gone through, and it felt like we'd really invested in them as an individual, even to the point where they said it was like you were prepared I was joining. And it amazes me, in so many organizations I've worked, we put so much focus into the recruitment up to the point someone accepts the offer, and then almost it can be a bit forgotten when they first join, and trying to integrate them into a team, recognize we need to kind of reset that team as somebody new joins it. And also, as you say, just identifying that first couple of weeks are so critical to both for the individual to form an opinion of the organization, but also for them to check whether it's meeting their expectations. And I'd encourage everybody actually to think, are you really doing enough during those early phases of someone's career with you to make them feel special and make them feel part of your team? What's also interesting, I think, when we recently kind of rebuilt some of our induction material, didn't we? It's to stop and actually reflect on, have we actually inducted all of our existing employees as well as we're now inducting new people? I don't know, I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, whether are we now actually telling our new employees more than at times maybe our existing people know as we go through that induction process?
I think that's a really important question, Paul. And I would say the answer is no, we haven't onboarded them to that same level. And absolutely, some of these new employees that have been coming through the last year or so have a much better idea about the Agena Group and what that really means on a larger scale. Everything through from our ESG strategy to their terms and conditions, to our mission statement, our values, and what that all means is really important. And actually, it's something that we're talking a little bit about within the team about, let's invite actually our employees onto the onboarding sessions that we hold each week. So they can go through that themselves, as part of within the Agena group, we do have some wellbeing champions and mental health first aiders, and we encouraged all of those before they volunteered to be that to go through the onboarding so they could remember what that was like to be. So we have onboarding buddies, and they have gone through the onboarding experience just recently. So they've got a good idea in their minds about the information that they do receive, but also perhaps what could be really helpful as a new starter, having the insight to know what that really means within the Agena group and what that could look like for those roles who are field-based, remote, hybrid. As a setup within the group, we have a whole range of different working styles and patterns. So that can look so different to each of us. But having these buddies can really help us ensure that our people, when they're new, feel that they've embedded, and not just from a corporate place, right, of the people services team, of their line manager, but actually having that kind of connection, that community with a buddy who might be a peer equal. They might be in the same location, they might not. And just really helping them to feel that they've embedded culturally within the organisation.
I guess what I love about that buddy system, Carly, is that less formal relationship for a new starter to have, rather than it being their line manager and feeling, if they're asking questions or wanting to check understanding, they don't have to feel vulnerable to think, is someone assessing my performance? Am I asking too many questions? And so I guess to give them that route out to someone who's there just to help their early part of their career with us, and that's onboarding phase, and that less formal relationship that inevitably develops with their line manager. So yeah, it's been really great to see you introduce that actually, and some of the value that's brought. One topic, and maybe I should have started with this, but just to step back a little bit further, is our candidate attraction process. You talk to me all the time about our ATS and our new HR information system. So can we, I guess, maybe just explain what do we mean by an ATS, and then how we've used that data to really refine our attraction campaigns?
Absolutely. So our ATS, or our applicant tracking system, it really is the lifeblood of our recruitment process and our recruitment campaigns. We get such valuable insight from it, and I'd really encourage anybody that can to implement one. So what we get from the ATS is really everything. So we can have so much information that we need to make sure that it's actually valuable to us. And again, at different times and with different perhaps problems, that can look different. But what we'll get from that is, so for one, we have one job posting that then targets over 20 different job boards. And so with that, we'll review how a recruitment campaign has gone after each process. We'll look at, from those different job boards, what's worked well and what hasn't. And we'll do that even to the point of just the seasonality. What that can work well in one particular season isn't for another. The same by role as well. And so what we'll judge that by is not just the rate of applicant, but also the quality of the applications as well. Something that's a real value add to me and my team is that we have the ability to ensure that the applications that come in can be anonymous. We do that for some roles, not all of them. The reason for that is to help us be the most inclusive workforce that we can be. So for our diversity and equality, just having some information not on an application, does that make a difference? And we can review that. But also I hope that the candidate can feel an additional level of inclusivity from that process. What's also allowed us to do as part of being a disability confident employer is ensure that we can provide reasonable adjustments as part of our recruitment process. And again, how that looks to an individual can be so different. So it just gives us the ability to, by saying a kind of yes or no, we can then make contact, find out what that will look like for that individual, because that's who they are, right? You know, we can't blanket a rule for all different types of people, and we're really committed to partnering with those individuals to ensure that we provide that equal inclusive process to them. What it gives us though, we'll understand from the job boards what works well. So what's the best job board for particular industries, roles and locations too, because we have so many here. And what we'll find is that we can look at the time it's taken for an individual to apply to a role. So rightly or wrongly, sometimes on some applications, we'll find that it can take up 3 seconds. And so you can probably appreciate maybe the time that has gone into that application versus an application that's maybe taken an hour or more. And And often we'll see that in the response that's given too. And what we're really looking for is, we design these roles and the job descriptions and person specifications for a reason. And so when we see those applications, that's what we're looking for. And so going through that application, we can see that, which can be helpful, because sometimes actually, like I said, it's not necessarily the quantity, but the quality is even more important. So we'll look at that in terms of the time to application. That can really make effect in terms of our sifting time or screening time, as we call it as well. So we'll go through screen based on those person specifications, but we'll make learnings too. So if we find, for example, that we've had, a decent amount of applications, but not that have met the person specification, we can go back to the drawing board and go, okay, well, that's the insights that the ATS has given us for this. What can we do differently? Get together, working together to just really consider that and try again. And it's constantly evolving. It really is. So we'll look at that. We can also see from the insights, time to hire as well, which can be really helpful and interesting, specifically for those more challenging applications that can take a little bit longer for those skill sets that we don't have quite enough that we need, certainly not in this country. So when we're particularly looking at some of our tech-based roles, that can be a little bit more challenging. So how we approach that can be so different, but having those learnings from previous campaigns really helps us with that. We can then educate our recruiting managers on what we found previously, and we can give them data to back that, which they all, I think in my experience, have found that particularly useful.
Charlie, what's I guess what's been really fascinating, if I look at our recruitment cycle, both during the kind of pandemic and COVID and then since, I guess it's been through some fairly significant swings where, we were desperate for more people to apply, and I guess through that process we're almost kind of lowering the bar on how difficult it was to apply. I think more recently what we've seen, I remember you coming into one of our board meetings saying it's just too easy for people to apply, and we're being overwhelmed by the wrong type of candidates, which we're then having to invest the time of sifting, and then making that hurdle higher again has been fascinating to see, actually. I don't think I've ever worked in a business where we're using that type of data to inform our strategies and reflecting that over time. And I think the day when you came to us and said we need to higher the bar to reduce the number of applicants, it did worry me, because I thought, well, surely we just want everybody who wants to apply for the job to come through and not make that too difficult. But obviously the data kind of speaks for itself and has really helped us, I guess, now refine to make sure we're people are applying who are right for the role, and then our conversion rate to hire has been much more successful. But for me, that's just such a great way of using that data and changing our approach over time, which has been great to see. I guess just moving on, thinking a little bit more now about in terms of people as part of the employee life cycle. So, we've dealt with how we are attracting people, the strategies and the data we're using there, and then how we're managing that early phase of their career through that onboarding phase. One thing which I know I like a lot, and I did post about this the other Saturday when I had some spare time, was our Kudos tool, and how people are able to just openly share feedback with peers and colleagues. So can you just talk us through a little bit about how Kudos works and why that's such an integral part of the people plan?
Absolutely. And like you, it really is one of my favourite insights. I think if you just need picking up of a day, we will just log on and have a look. It's something that I send to the board each month. Because as we said in the beginning here, it's really important that we pick up on what our employees are celebrating. What is it that we're doing well, and learn from that just as much as the type of insights that we get that tell us what we can do differently too. So what to me that really indicates is when we're seeing these high level of recognition on our Kudos tool is that we have a group of employees who appreciate each other, that they're finding meaningful work in what they're doing with each other. I love it the most when I see interdepartment recognition through Kudos. It shows you, high performing teams and collaboration. And I think, post a COVID working environment where, hybrid working is a minimum, often remote, sometimes field-based as well in our case too. it really shows you that difference. And one of the things that I really encourage when speaking to new or existing employees about our Kudos tool is, I think we can all probably remember a time where somebody just said thank you. And actually the difference that can make to your day, it encourages you to know what good looks like, I should say. And that is just as important to a new employee, an existing employee, and for a line manager too. But also to our board as well. Actually, this is what is going well. And that's often can be the case too. So I really encourage all of our people to use it as much as they see fit. I'd like to run some leaderboards as well on who has given the most recognition, but as well as those who've received the most too. I think that says so much. And again, that's something that's really led from the top, I would say. So I love nothing more than to see the executives in the business providing some kudos, because we all should be doing that. And I know, Paul, in your last session with Luke, it can be a lonely place to be being CEO. You don't always get that kind of recognition. And I really encourage all of our employees who are listening to this today to make sure to remember that when there's a job well done, give Paul that bit of recognition as well as the rest of your teams, because it's great. It is a great insight for us all to receive. And I think that's the thing we can see from an individual level, from a team level, but even more than that cross department. It's so important, and it does make a difference to an individual. I think there's few people who don't like to be recognised for a job well done.
Yeah, and I guess two things that stand out for me, Carly, is one is kudos isn't about financial reward for doing a good job, and obviously we have different and separate recognition schemes and reward schemes. That, and that just the name in itself, that kudos, that kind of recognition from your peers, from your colleagues, those people around you that you've done a great job and should celebrate that moment, for me, so powerful. I guess one thing that struck me over, the time we've been doing kudos is how many people are calling out their line managers as well, actually. And it's not just someone in a people manager role recognizing their team. There's been so many examples of people saying, I just want to call out my team leader or my manager because they're so, they're such a good role model, or they've supported me through a difficult time, whatever that might be. And I think removing those, almost perceived boundaries of who can recognize who has been so important. And actually some of the most rewarding comments have come where people are recognizing those people in those people management roles and those difficult roles. But also some of our ward and patrols and our field teams who do an incredibly difficult job being the face of our organization out in our parking facilities every day of every week. And actually the people in the office recognizing how well they've served our clients directly, because we all know that's such a challenging role, and our team do such an amazing job in representing the organization externally. I guess the other thing for me which allows us to measure is that connection to our values, and through kudos, where we are recognizing individuals and then seeing which value we feel that represents the most. And that's been great, actually, to see the values where we've seen more and more people being recognized around collaboration and innovation and insights. But then maybe some of the other values where we're not seeing that kudos, and does that give us some data and some insights to say maybe that's an area we need to focus on more as an organization and push a little bit harder than we have in the past. But yeah, some great data points, I guess, coming out of that, which is always a pleasure to read. As you say, it's the highlight of the month, I think, for us both, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I'm keen to get on to what we mean by stay interviews, Carly, because I think of all the episodes we've done, I've probably had the most questions to say, I just don't know what you mean. So can we talk through, maybe just to start with very briefly, the traditional exit interview with someone at the end of their life cycle with an employer, and how, and you should absolutely take kudos for this, how you introduce the stay interview as an alternative for interviewing someone when they left. It'd be great if you could just talk us through those differences and what we learn from a stay interview that you don't learn through an exit interview.
Of course. So starting off with the exit interview, and many of you are probably quite familiar with an exit interview. So the employee gets to the point where they have resigned, provided their formal confirmation of that resignation. It then instigates our confirmation, and also part of that an interview, an invite to interview for the exit survey. And at that point, you'd listen to why it is that they got to this point, why they're resigning, perhaps where they're going to, if there's anything that you could have done differently. And I'm sure many of us listening to this today will have experienced, either on the employee side or the business side, the counter offer, and sometimes getting into that. What I would say with regards to a counter offer is it nearly always never works out. It's just prolongs the inevitable. And to us, and an exit interview, yes, it can be useful, but actually I would actually say it's pretty useless, to be honest. That person's got to the point they've left. So what we decided to do was, after that, was going, hang on a second, should we even be doing these exit interviews anymore? What are we actually getting from this? What difference is this making? And so we decided that, no, we won't do them. In fact, what we'll do instead is stay interviews. And so we now have moved to stay interviews. And why that's important is actually a study by Gallup showed that 52% of employees say that a line manager could have prevented them from leaving before they got to that point. My goodness, that's like half of your people, right? And that's not just an industry based, that is, that's on a huge scale. So of that 52% of people that leave an organization, I appreciate for some of them, leaving might very well be the right thing, but there's a huge portion of those that you want to keep. And so we decided to use stay interviews for that reason. So for us, how we do a stay interview, it's absolutely not for people services to complete those stay interviews unless it's with their team. It's for the line managers. So line managers should be conducting stay interviews. The stay interview can be anywhere between sort of 15, 20 minutes to longer if that's what's necessary. And it can happen at any time. So going back where we talked earlier about the onboarding, we really encourage for our line managers to do stay interviews in that onboarding process, because it will indicate to you already, why is it that this person sticks around? What we're ultimately looking for when we talk about stay interviews is, why is that person staying? What insights can they give us to tell us why they're staying? And that might look like when they're down the pub or what have you at the end of the week with a group of friends, what is it that they're saying is good about their role, good about their job, good about their company? But why is it just going to their friends or their family? We want to know that too. And we don't want to wait till the point where they're leaving to know that information, because if we can know that information sooner, we can make sure that we keep that. But if equally as well, if there's something that makes them want to leave perhaps, and that could be on a temporary basis, that could be something that feels a bit more longer in terms of time scale, we absolutely want to know that, because we can do something about it. So thinking about that 52% of people, we can absolutely do it and part of their onboarding experience. But let's look at those people who have been in the organisation for longer than that probation time. We want to keep them. So something that we actively encourage our line managers to do is on their anniversary to conduct a stay interview with them. There's a series of questions, but so that we can get some of these really important insights. But equally, when we train our line managers with this, we say, don't feel that you just keep to these, because what this will tell you is, how well do you know your team and your team members? That brings these stay interviews, bring you this step together, this closer relationship to knowing your people well and knowing them better. And again, in a post-COVID environment, that's much more difficult now, where for a lot of teams, you're not in the same office all day, every day. So that kind of collaboration, those conversations are less likely perhaps to happen over Teams that they would have just happened at the water cooler or what have you, even with that line manager. So with the stay interview, it will ask a series of different questions all about how they're finding meaning in their work, what it is that they enjoy about coming to work. When they're talking to people outside of work about what they like about their role, what do they say? As I said, so that we can find that out. If they had the opportunity to redefine their job role, what would that look like? And what insight that will give to any people manager is something about development. We find it can be difficult for some people who don't know exactly how they want to develop, to know where to go. And just that question alone can give you that insight to have much more of an understanding about what that would look like. It can help us understand as well what them working to their strengths looks like, and that's something that's really important to us. We actually do use a Gallup assessment as part of that as well to find that out from our people. But it will also tell us too about what works well as part of a team environment and what that contribution feels like. It will tell a line manager what recognition looks like to them, because let's face it, that can look really different to some people who quite like the external kind of feedback of recognition. Doing that as part of a town hall could be the place, or a department meeting. But for some of them, perhaps more introverted, that's the worst thing that you could do to them. And actually just saying that in a one-to-one, saying that perhaps in a written card, 90% of people keep a written card. So actually just being a bit more conscious of those kind of decisions that you'll make with regards to how you recognise your people. All of this really quality information can come from a stay interview. But as you go through that process as well, you very well might find that much more of an insight can come to guide you through this kind of conversation. When it doesn't happen is when somebody looks to leave, because at that point, and perhaps for many of us here today, you can think about a time when you have left an organisation. There has been a lead up to that. By the time you go to resign, you've most often accepted another position, and kind of psychologically you've moved on. But what if we could stop that much earlier? So like I said, we bring that into the anniversaries, but equally we also ask our line managers to really consider when they can be used in a different way too. So as with many organizations, sometimes you can have some more difficult times, right? And so that's a great opportunity to do some stay interviews, to just get a real insight into how your team are right now. You can do that as a collective. It might very well be that in a team they've got a retention issue. So using our stay interviews to find out from the existing team, getting that kind of pulse point on how they're feeling right now, what's going well right now, what's not going so well right now. And the most important thing that we can get from any of these stay interviews are actions. And what I would say for any of your listeners that are interested in considering stay interviews, you can absolutely do these and then do nothing about the actions, and they won't particularly useful. I read when we implemented these stay interviews that Hilton actually implemented them, and they had a 55% turnover, and they reduced that by 50% in 4 months from doing stay interviews, because they made action on what they heard back. And that is the secret, I suppose, to this, and that's why they work so well. What can be frustrating for employees is listening to that really important feedback that they have and then doing nothing about it afterwards either. That is the key. So in good times, do them. In bad times, do them. When they're new, do them. When they've been around for a while, absolutely do them. It's really, it can be a one-to-one. That's something that we actively encourage our line managers to do really frequently, to have those check-ins, just to mix it up a little bit. Why not do a stay interview once, twice a year too? It's a great way to kind of have a provider framework and something different when catching up with your team members.
And I guess, Carly, and that's such a fantastic explanation, actually. So I appreciate you taking us through that. What strikes me is exit interviews in every sense are focusing on the negative. As you say, someone's made that decision to leave. They're in a negative frame of mind typically because of the reasons why they're leaving. And what you'll generally draw out are those negative examples of what's caused them to leave. If I think back through my entire career, the actions I've taken out the back of an exit interview are probably pretty limited, because there may be things which I can't easily change within the organization. What's also really interesting, if we go back to some of the points we made in the earlier episodes of this series, is it's really moving from that hindsight to that foresight. Is, well, if we did those things, we might have been able to retain that person who's now left. And I think for me, you don't think about implementing necessarily those actions for everyone else who is still with you. But every question in a exit interview is negative. So why are you leaving? What are the things that you didn't like that's caused you to leave? Everything in a stay interview is generally positive. What else can we do to redefine your role to make you happier or create more challenge? What are the reasons why you're staying? And for me, I'd encourage everyone to measure retention and not attrition, because it's just a more positive measure. But in supporting that and underpinning that, to understand why your retention is where your retention is, rather than just focusing on attrition. And I guess a lot of the things we've traditionally done from a people management perspective have had that negative focus to that extent, looking at, attrition, leavers, reasons for leaving. So I know for me, it's, we're still probably 12 months in on stay interviews. We're still building the data, we're still building the trends. But for me, I think it's been just a really important step on that journey of improving our staff retention and showing people there's an opportunity to develop within the organisation rather than having to look outside.
Yeah, absolutely. Point there with regards to retention, I think these can be really fundamental to making a strategy to improve retention, and setting that goal, using this and then reducing as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I look forward to us maybe coming back in the future, Carly, and talking about what we've seen from a trend perspective and how some of that data, maybe we might have another headline like Hilton have at some point in the coming months. The final area, Carly, just to touch on is how we look to get feedback from our entire organisation through both our pulse surveys and our engagement surveys. So could we maybe just talk about what's the difference between a pulse survey and an engagement survey? And I guess I'm particularly keen just to dig into what we do as an output of those surveys, because I guess lots of people are probably running employee surveys. I guess what I'd like to focus on is what we actually do with the outcomes.
Absolutely, yeah. So to your point there, we do have an engagement survey and then pulse survey separate. So with regards to the engagement survey, which we actually renamed this year to Have Your Say survey, it kind of does what it says on the tin, really. We really want to hear what employees have to say. And then with regards to the pulse surveys, that's a much more quick snapshot. So where we found those pulse surveys particularly helpful was in COVID times. We could gauge an understanding of how our employees were feeling from a health and safety perspective, from a work perspective, from a well-being perspective. It really did help us where we were all course at home in isolation. That really helped us to understand how we could best support our people. But equally, I can bring almost a stay interview into that more pulse type of survey too. We also find pulse surveys useful when we think about our ESG strategy, for example. So we're working out on our carbon footprint on our commuting experience and patterns and behaviours, I should say. So what our employees do then, of course, that does change. So we do that every year, which is linked to that. If we have something that we need to know from our people, we need to know it more quickly. I'd say that's where we can really use our surveys quite well and then implement action. Where me and my team find that most useful is this engagement survey or Have Your Say survey. So what we find from that, and that goes out to all of our people, and we actively encourage all of our people to have their say, because it tells us what we can do differently. And I think, talking about insights today, that's what makes them the most useful, certainly for my team, and that to which we present to the board is what do we need to do? What do we need to do better, differently, but also what's working well as well. And so all of our people have their say. We'll use that data then. We'll present that to kind of three main groups. So the board, all heads of department, managers, people responsibilities, and then the whole group as well. So everybody is as an employee, because we need to tell them what it is our people have to say. And so one of the things we've done over the last 2 years is created a bit of a you said we did type approach to that. So instead of a you said we did, it's you said what we're going to do about it. And then so we present that as part of our company all hands at the beginning of a year, and tell them what it is we're going to do. And then that provides really the strategy for my team in terms of what we're doing for the year ahead. we'll make all those changes, and then, like what happened at the end of last year, for example, we can say to our people, this is what you said and this is what we've actually done now, rather than what we're going to do. So they can really see actually that what they have to say will do something about it, that action piece like we talked about, because that is so fundamental to gathering this data. And that can look really different. So that can be with regards to communication, that can be training. We'll understand from our annual engagement survey how our people feel like we can be more diverse as an organisation. We, on purpose, actually ask them what they would like to celebrate the most for that previous year. And what I loved to see this year was that above and beyond anything else, what they wanted to celebrate the most was the systems that we've put in place. So, and that was it throughout the whole organisation, making they can just see a real investment that was made there, and that's just the start. There's more still to come there, which is really exciting. We'll ask them a series of questions. Some of them can be new each year, especially if there's something that we want to understand. Maybe it's something that we just need to see if that is a problem or if that is going well. But what we do that is really helpful is we keep a large proportion of the questions, probably the majority, I would say, the same each year, so that we can see how that's changing each year, and whether we're moving in what we would say is the right direction, or not as well. That we find particularly useful when we're talking to exec team and managers on really getting a picture for the organisation and how it is that we're shifting and moving forward. So that, I think, is probably the most important part to this piece that we do, because we could very much just get this data and not really do very much for it, right? Doesn't really provide too much of an insight if we do that, but it's that action piece that is really important to us. And that's why we'll encourage all of our people to give us the most information that they possibly can on these surveys, to have the highest level of engagement. And what we've done for the first time this year is also use our Net Promoter Score as part of that. I think that's really helpful externally as well as internally to understand where we are as a group. And it's also something that we can talk to about our clients as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, look, Ali, that's been absolutely great. And I guess our view is, if we weren't going to take those actions, commit to the actions we're going to take, and then reflect on what we have done, I would just encourage people not to bother with the survey at all. Because for me, there's nothing worse than asking for feedback and engagement and then being so dismissive not to implement any of it. And I know lots of organisations I've worked in the past, I've provided, and the team's provided input into what they'd like to see change, and then the next thing they see is the next year's survey. And I think for me that can be more disruptive than helpful. So using those actions, using those data points, look at how trends are moving forward, for me is just a really important part of that. So I think that's probably us time up, Carly. I've really enjoyed the kind of conversations there. I think that piece, particularly around stay interviews, just kind of re-cements for me just that importance of catching people in that positive conversation, whether that's through the onboarding part of somebody during their probation period, or whether that's part of their long-term employment and as part of their annual reviews, which again, for many can be quite a negative conversation because it's focused on, did you achieve the objectives we set last year? How have you performed? Turning that into a much more positive conversation, I think, can give people some real interesting insights they wouldn't ordinarily have. Just to finish us off, Carly, I'm just going to ask you if there's one thing that you feel you've done that's added the most value that you'd encourage maybe other people in a similar position to you, or other people who have influence within organisations. What would that one thing be that you'd encourage everybody to do who's listening today?
Oh, great question, Paul. I think what I would have to say is listening to your people. And that can very much be a face-to-face conversation, but it can absolutely be using your data, using your insights to understand your people. Ultimately, for most organisations, people are the lifeblood. They're what makes your company successful. And so listening to what they have to say, how things could be better. If there's a problem in your product, your service, really listening to what they have to say and taking action on that. I think, especially when, for most places where you're working a million miles an hour, just taking that time to listen. And I think, especially with regards to my department and my role here, is we can hear a lot, and we are, I suppose, a little bit more neutral on the outside of some of the things that are happening, but feeding back to business leaders about what's really going on, that kind of those touch points, because ultimately for all of us, we just want to make whether the place that we work the best possible place. We really want to create that environment for business success. So I think that's probably what I would say is the most important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, look, Carly, thanks again for joining us today. That's been really fascinating conversation, and I know you've been looking forward to this for weeks. So it's great for us to finally kind of move through that and get it done. And we're now the other side, Carly, so you can now go and encourage everyone else to come on and do the same.
Absolutely. Thanks, Paul.
And thanks to everyone who's joined us today. Those people who are kind of watching us back, which I know so many of you do. Your time has been really appreciated, and I do hope through this series you're finding something that you can reflect on and maybe implement within your own business. So, as we said at the start, episode 6 is coming soon, but we are yet to announce what that will be. So do watch out for that to be across all of our LinkedIn profiles, and I'll announce as soon as we're ready for our next LinkedIn Live, which will be episode 6. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed the rest of your week. We're almost there now, with it being Thursday afternoon, and look forward to welcoming you back soon. Please do, as always, just drop us some comments on this feed. I would love to hear from people, especially that 75% of people who have not implemented stay interviews, to go and give that a go and come and feedback on here about what you found and what have you learned about your organization, your people you didn't know before. This series and this LinkedIn Live is all about trying to share some experiences and some techniques that we're using within our organization to help everybody run more successful businesses and teams. So please do keep that feedback coming. But with that, we will leave you to the rest of your day. Thanks again for joining us, and we will see you all on episode 6 very soon.